So, for example, life expectancy in Japan is higher than in the US, despite the average national income being less. In fact, life expectancy in the US is amongst the lowest in the developed world, despite it being the richest country. One of the driving ideas of social and economic policy is that economic growth is supposed to make societies healthier and happier. The richer society is, the better, and while that's true in the early stage of economic development, beyond a certain point, increases in the average income of societies seems to make almost no difference at all. But when you look within any of the rich developed countries, it looks as if income is extraordinarily important. There's a regular gradient right across society. The better off people are, the longer they live. In any given year, a greater proportion of the poor die than the rich. And it's not just the differences between the poor and the rest of society. Even well-off people just below the richest are less healthier than the rich. We're all part of this pattern that people commonly refer to as health inequalities. That is, the big differences in health and life expectancy between people in different social classes or with different levels of income or education. Commonly find anything between 5 and sometimes 15-year differences in life expectancy between the poorest areas and the richest areas in the developed countries. This is a real paradox. The difference between countries don't seem to matter, but income differences within these same countries seem to matter very much. How can we make sense of that? Well, what it suggests is that it may not be the level of your income that's important, not how much wealth you have, but how much you have compared to others in your society. So what we may be seeing are the effects of social position, social status, and relative income. It seems to be about the relation between people within a society, not about the absolute material standards. How can we check this out? One way might be to see what happens if we make the status differences between people bigger or smaller. If you increase or decrease the income differences between us, what happens to life expectancy? One way of measuring how unequal a society is by seeing how much richer the top 20% of the population are than the bottom 20%. In more equal countries like Japan and Sweden, the top 20% is perhaps 3 or 4 times as rich as the bottom 20%. While in the more unequal countries like Portugal, Singapore, United States and Britain, the gaps are twice as big. The top 20% are 7, 8 or even 9 times as rich as the bottom 20%. We think of all the rich developed countries as fairly similar, but these are important differences and they have effects on the societies we live in. So if you look at life expectancy from this perspective, something very interesting happens. While there is little relationship between life expectancy and the overall wealth of the society, when we look at its relationship to inequality, we find that the more equal a society is, the longer people's average life expectancy. And this connection to inequality is not just true of life expectancy. It's also true of a wide range of health and social problems, including infant mortality, mental illness, obesity, educational performance, homicide rates, imprisonment rates, etc. We put these different outcomes together to form an index of health and social problems. The higher the score, the worse the problems are. So countries can be ranked on this index from the lowest, which do better, to the highest, doing worst. If you plot them against GNP per head, there's very little relationship. It doesn't seem to matter among the developed countries if a country is a bit richer or a bit poorer. But as soon as you look at these problems against income inequality, you see a remarkable correlation. The more equal a society, the better it does. This holds true across all types of issues. The United Nations produced something called the Index of Child Wellbeing for measuring child well-being among the rich developed countries. It combines 40 different indicators related to well-being of children. So it contains whether kids can talk to their parents, whether there's bullying in schools, whether they have books at home, how well they do on immunization rates, etc. The higher this score, the better a country's child well-being is. Again, shown against GNP per head, there's very little relationship. But there's a strong relationship as soon as you look at it in relation to income inequality.